Claire Donovan thought she had married the man of her dreams, but Matthew Hale had already given his heart, and his loyalty, to someone else. On their wedding night, while Claire wore white and believed in forever, Matthew and his secret lover were already putting their deadly plan into motion. By sunrise, the bride would vanish without a trace, and the chilling truth behind her disappearance would leave an entire town shattered. Claire Donovan had always dreamed of a beautiful wedding, the kind that lingered in people's memories and made photo albums feel like storybooks. Her big day was everything she had hoped for. The sun warmed the fields of Silver Hollow as the vineyard buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and live string music. Rows of wooden chairs were arranged between white rose bushes, and golden lanterns hung from the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Claire, in her lace gown, looked radiant and full of hope as she walked down the aisle toward Matthew Hale, her soon-to-be husband, who stood smiling in a tailored navy blue suit. Matthew was the kind of man who made people stop and listen. Confident, charming, and financially successful, he had won the hearts of Claire's family almost instantly. Her friends often said she was lucky to have found someone so attentive. He sent her handwritten notes, planned surprise dates, and even helped her plan parts of the wedding. To everyone watching them exchange vows, their love looked solid, genuine and promising. As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, the crowd erupted in applause, and it seemed like nothing could go wrong. The reception was held under a canopy strung with fairy lights. Guests dined on roasted duck, fresh bread, and local wine. Claire's parents gave a tearful toast. Matthew's best man, a childhood friend, joked about how Matthew used to avoid commitment and how Claire had changed him. People laughed and nodded in agreement. Everyone agreed the couple made a perfect match. Photographers moved through the crowd, capturing moments. An elderly couple slow dancing, children chasing bubbles, the newlyweds feeding each other cake. Everything appeared perfect. But even perfection cast shadows. There were small details most overlooked at the time. Claire seemed distant during dinner, her gaze lingering too long on her untouched plate. At one point, she had excused herself for nearly 20 minutes, returning with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When a bridesmaid asked her if everything was okay, Claire brushed it off, saying she was just overwhelmed by the emotions of the day. Still, the tension in her shoulders told a different story. Matthew was attentive, but at times, distracted. He checked his phone frequently, stepping away from the table more than once to take calls in private. When he returned, he claimed it was just work emergencies, and no one questioned it further. Most assumed he was trying to wrap up last-minute business before leaving for the honeymoon. But there was something odd in his urgency, something too practiced about the way he smiled when people asked what the calls were about. Late in the evening, as the sky turned violet and music filled the vineyard, a woman was seen near the edge of the field. She wasn't mingling with the guests or seated at any table. Dressed in black with her hair tied back, she stood watching the couple from a distance. A few people noticed her, but assumed she was part of the catering staff or a curious passerby. When the photographer reviewed the photos later, she appeared in several frames, always at the edge, always staring. No one remembered inviting her. As the night wore on, Claire and Matthew performed their final dance beneath the glowing lights. Claire smiled, but those who looked closely could see the fatigue beneath it. Not just physical exhaustion, but something else. Something deeper, harder to define. She held on to Matthew like someone trying to stay grounded. When it was time to leave, guests threw dried lavender in the air as the couple made their way to the vintage car, waiting to take them to the inn, where they'd spend their first night as husband and wife. They waved goodbye, Claire leaning into Matthew, the picture of happiness. But as the car pulled away, a few people thought they saw her turn to glance out the back window, her face unreadable. In the rearview mirror, the woman in black was no longer there. By the following morning, the fairy tale had unraveled. The joy, the glittering lights, the scent of wine and roses, everything faded into a memory clouded by confusion and grief. Claire never returned from that wedding night. What had started as the happiest day of her life became the final chapter of it. And while guests returned to their homes, still carrying the warmth of celebration, they had no idea they had just witnessed the beginning of something far darker. The morning after the wedding, the innkeeper at the Willow Creek Inn prepared breakfast as usual. unaware that a nightmare had already taken root in one of her suites. The honeymoon room, reserved for newlyweds Claire and Matthew Hale, was expected to remain quiet and private. But by 8 a.m., a maid attempting to deliver complimentary breakfast found the door ajar. Inside, the room was in disarray. The first thing she noticed was the silence. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled as if someone had thrashed in them. A lamp near the nightstand had been knocked over, the bulb shattered on the floor. On the dresser sat Claire's bridal clutch, still zipped shut. Her suitcase was untouched, clothes neatly folded as if never opened. Her phone lay on the floor. The screen cracked but still on. The maid backed out of the room quickly and called for the manager, who then contacted the police. Matthew was still there, sitting on the edge of the bathtub with his hands covering his face. He looked up as officers entered, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse. He said Claire had left the room in the middle of the night. According to him, they had argued, and she needed space. He claimed she walked out around 1 a.m., barefoot, without her phone, wearing only her silk robe. He said he waited for her to come back, then fell asleep. When he woke up, she was still gone. Detectives found his story immediately suspicious. It was hard to believe a bride would storm off just hours after her wedding, leaving behind all her belongings, including her wedding ring. It had been placed carefully on the nightstand next to a crumpled napkin stained with lipstick and a faint trace of perfume. It looked deliberate, like a message, though no one could decipher exactly what it meant. Surveillance cameras on the property offered no clear answers. The hallway camera outside the suite had malfunctioned sometime during the night, a coincidence that raised even more questions. The only working footage showed Matthew leaving the inn briefly, through a back exit around 2 a.m. He was gone for just under 30 minutes before returning alone. When asked about it, he said he had gone out to look for Claire, thinking she might have gone for a walk or gotten lost nearby. But he hadn't called anyone. He hadn't notified staff, and he hadn't contacted Claire's family, who were still staying in the same town. By midday, the search for Claire was underway. Her family was notified and arrived at the inn in a panic. Her mother collapsed at the sight of Claire's untouched suitcase. Her father, pale and trembling, walked the perimeter of the inn, calling her name over and over. Police combed the area, questioning hotel staff, wedding guests, and anyone who might have seen Claire after the reception. No one had. The last confirmed sighting of her was when she stepped into the vintage car with Matthew after their send-off. From that moment on, it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Rumors spread quickly through Silver Hollow. Some believed Claire had gotten cold feet and run away. Others whispered darker theories. That Matthew had something to hide. That he hadn't been as devoted as he appeared. The story became the center of every conversation in town, especially after the police released a statement confirming foul play was suspected. That small piece of information shifted everything. Behind the scenes, investigators were already digging deeper. They looked into Matthew's background, searching for anything unusual. Old relationships, financial stress, strange behavior. What they found wasn't immediately criminal, but it painted a more complex picture than the one presented at the wedding. Matthew had taken out a large life insurance policy on Claire just weeks before the ceremony. He had explained it away as future planning, but the timing now seemed suspicious. Even more unsettling were phone records showing a high volume of late-night calls to an unknown number in the days leading up to the wedding. A number registered to a woman named Emily Rhodes. The case took a darker turn with every new discovery. Claire's disappearance was no longer treated as a tragic mystery. It was becoming a likely homicide. What made it worse was that no one could explain how it had happened without anyone noticing. A bride vanishing from her honeymoon suite in a small, tightly monitored inn should have left a trail. But there was no trail. Just a broken lamp, a silent phone, a discarded wedding ring, and a husband whose story kept shifting with every question. The fairy tale had ended, and something much more sinister had taken its place. The discovery of the phone records changed everything. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Emily Rhodes, the woman behind the mysterious number that appeared dozens of times in Matthew's call logs. She was a 30-year-old veterinary technician who lived in a quiet neighborhood 2 towns over. Her social media profiles were mostly private, with only a few visible posts of her with dogs and coworkers. There were no pictures of Matthew, no trace of any connection, on the surface. But the connection existed. It ran deep and had been hidden in plain sight. When police contacted Emily, she appeared cooperative at first. She claimed she hadn't spoken to Matthew in over a year, and that their relationship had ended long ago. She expressed shock over Claire's disappearance and offered vague condolences. But her story didn't hold for long. Investigators already had text records, call times, and even photos pulled from deleted phone backups that contradicted nearly everything she said. Emily and Matthew had been involved romantically for almost a year, most of it overlapping with his engagement to Claire. Their messages were obsessive and increasingly volatile. Emily spoke of being promised a future, of being told she was the one. But as the wedding drew closer, the tone of her text changed. She became desperate, erratic. She accused Matthew of betrayal, warned him she wouldn't be cast aside. In one message she wrote, "I won't let her take what was supposed to be mine." The turning point came when detectives obtained traffic camera footage placing Emily's black SUV near the Willow Creek Inn on the night of the wedding. She had told police she was home the entire evening, but the time-stamped footage showed her driving within a mile of the inn shortly after 1 a.m. The same time Matthew claimed Claire had walked out, a search warrant was issued. Inside Emily's vehicle, forensic teams found traces of blood on the backseat floor mats and long strands of hair that matched Claire's. More damning was the discovery of a pair of torn bridal lace gloves stuffed in the trunk, hidden under a blanket. It was clear now that Emily hadn't just been involved, she had been present. The evidence was undeniable. Brought in for further questioning, Emily's demeanor changed. Her cool, polite facade melted under the weight of proof. She admitted to being near the inn that night, but claimed she hadn't seen Claire. She said she had driven there in a moment of emotional breakdown, hoping to confront Matthew, but lost her nerve and left without speaking to anyone. The detectives didn't believe her, and they had reason not to. Tire tracks at a remote trail near Lake Eden, 20 miles from the inn, matched her SUV. That same area had already been flagged by search teams combing nearby water sources. When they confronted Matthew again with the mounting evidence, he denied orchestrating anything. He said Emily must have acted alone, that she had always been unstable and obsessive. But more texts told a different story. Hidden in his deleted folder were long threads between him and Emily, planning where to meet, when to sneak out, and even details on how to make sure it doesn't come back to us. In one particularly chilling message, Matthew had written, "Once it's done, we disappear like it never happened." It was now apparent this wasn't a random act of rage. It was premeditated. Matthew and Emily had plotted something together. The full scope of their plan wasn't yet clear, but the intention was there, to remove Claire. Whether it was out of jealousy, greed, or both, the decision had been made before the wedding even took place. Claire had walked down the aisle unaware that two people were waiting to erase her from the future. What had begun as a missing person case was now unraveling into a web of betrayal and calculated violence. The idea that the groom and his secret lover had stood so close to their victim, smiling, laughing, pretending to celebrate, shocked everyone who had attended the wedding. None of them had suspected a thing, and none of them had imagined that the love story they had come to witness was, in truth, a setup for murder. The question that haunted everyone now was no longer whether Claire had run away or gotten lost. The question was how long Matthew and Emily had been planning her death, and how far they were willing to go to make it happen. A week after Claire's disappearance, search efforts intensified. Local police expanded their radius, aided by state authorities, volunteers, and divers scouring every pond, ravine, and forested path within 50 miles of Silver Hollow. Helicopters flew overhead while drones swept vast stretches of wilderness. But there was still no sign of Claire, until a break came from an unlikely source. A retired fisherman named Henry Cobb was out early on Lake Eden, a calm, secluded body of water surrounded by dense pine trees. The lake rarely saw visitors aside from occasional campers and fishermen. As Henry pulled his line from the water, his eyes caught something unusual floating near a bed of reeds. At first, he thought it was debris, but as he got closer, his heart sank. It was a body, face down, tangled in weeds, the outline of a white silk robe barely visible beneath the murky surface. Authorities arrived within minutes. The scene was sealed off as forensic teams began their grim work. The body was identified quickly. It was Claire. Her engagement ring was missing, but her earrings matched those from her wedding photos. The silk robe, the same one she had worn at the inn, was soaked and torn. Around her ankle was a length of thin rope, weighed down by a rusted iron pipe. Someone had tried to keep her submerged out of sight, as if hoping the lake would swallow the evidence. The autopsy confirmed what investigators feared. Claire had died the night of the wedding. Blunt force trauma to the head was listed as the cause of death. Bruising along her arms and shoulders indicated a struggle. There was no water in her lungs, meaning she was already dead when her body entered the lake. Claire hadn't run away or wandered off. She had been killed and dumped like an afterthought. The discovery of the body eliminated any last shred of doubt. This was murder. And it had been planned. Attention turned immediately to Emily and Matthew. The evidence against Emily was already strong. Blood in her vehicle, Claire's gloves in the trunk, and tire marks that matched the area near the lake. But investigators were still building the case against Matthew. His texts with Emily hinted at conspiracy, but they needed more. They needed physical proof of his involvement. They found it in a surprising place, Matthew's garage. In a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard, officers discovered a small collection of personal items, a spare phone used only for communicating with Emily, a printed map with a red mark circling Lake Eden, and a metal pipe identical to the one used to weigh Claire's body down. The pipe had traces of the same algae found at the lake. The intent was clear. Matthew hadn't just known about the murder. He had helped plan and cover it up. Faced with the mounting evidence, Emily finally confessed. She claimed Matthew had manipulated her, convincing her that Claire stood in the way of their happiness. She said she never meant to kill Claire, only scare her into walking away. But when the confrontation turned violent, Matthew hadn't stopped her. Instead, he had helped dispose of the body and coached her on what to say if questioned. Her confession laid out the chilling details of the night. Claire had gone to the parking lot after Matthew, asked her to meet him there to talk privately. Emily was waiting in the shadows. There was a confrontation, an argument that escalated into violence. Claire tried to run, but Emily struck her with a metal pipe. Claire fell, motionless. Matthew arrived minutes later. After checking her pulse, he made the decision. They would get rid of the body and make it look like Claire had vanished. They wrapped her in the robe, carried her to Emily's SUV, and drove silently through the night to Lake Eden. There, they tied the iron pipe to her ankle and pushed her into the water. It was as cold and quiet as the murder itself. With Emily's confession, Matthew was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and being an accessory after the fact. Emily faced first-degree murder charges. The community of Silver Hollow was stunned. Just days ago, they had danced at a wedding, toasted the future of a beautiful couple, and now the truth had shattered everything. Behind the perfect smiles and sweet vows was a darkness that no one had seen coming. Justice was finally within reach, but the damage was irreversible. Claire's parents were left with a daughter buried too soon, her wedding dress packed away beside her childhood belongings. A life stolen on the very night it was meant to begin. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed in, eyes heavy with the weight of what they had heard over the past several weeks. The trial had drawn national attention, with news vans parked outside the courthouse and crowds gathering daily to follow every development. Inside, the atmosphere was cold and tense. Claire's parents sat in the front row, gripping each other's hands, their grief carved into their faces. They had endured every detail of their daughter's final hours, forced to relive the nightmare through photographs, text messages, and witness testimonies. Emily Rhodes sat pale and withdrawn at the defense table. Her once calm demeanor had deteriorated under the relentless pressure of cross-examination. She no longer looked like a heartbroken woman who'd made a mistake. The prosecution had painted her as a calculating and obsessive partner who couldn't bear to lose control. Her confession had helped the investigation, but it didn't erase the brutality of what she'd done. Matthew Hale's presence was even more chilling. He maintained a blank expression throughout the proceedings, avoiding eye contact with Claire's family, the jurors, and even Emily. The evidence against him had piled up like bricks: text messages, hidden items in his garage, and damning testimonies from acquaintances who said he often spoke about feeling trapped in the engagement. His defense team argued that he had been manipulated by Emily and never intended for anyone to die, but few believed him. When the verdict was read, there was no outburst, only silence. Emily was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Matthew was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and accessory after the fact, receiving 40 years. As he was led away in handcuffs, Claire's mother whispered her daughter's name and closed her eyes. It was over, at least legally. But healing would take longer. The town of Silver Hollow was never the same. The vineyard where the wedding had taken place shut down for months, unable to host events while under the shadow of such tragedy. Many of Claire's friends and former students attended a candlelight vigil in her honor, laying flowers by the lake where her body had been found. Her death had changed people's view of love, trust, and appearances. It made them question what they thought they knew about others, about how darkness could hide behind a smile. In the months that followed, Claire's parents founded the Claire Donovan Foundation, aimed at helping victims of emotional manipulation and domestic deceit. They gave talks, raised awareness, and funded educational programs about recognizing red flags in relationships. What had happened to Claire wasn't just about murder. It was about betrayal that had gone unnoticed for far too long. The investigation revealed that Matthew had been living a double life long before the wedding. Friends admitted in hindsight that he often acted differently when Claire wasn't around. More controlling, impatient, and cold. He had grown skilled at hiding things. The perfect fiancé was a mask, worn carefully to manipulate and charm. Emily had been his secret, a relationship built on deception and ego. She wanted more, and he didn't stop her from getting it. Until it was too late. The public was left to interpret the story in fragments: a romantic wedding, a missing bride, a lover hiding in the shadows, and a plan rooted in selfishness and obsession. People wondered how two individuals could share such a monstrous secret while dancing, laughing, and posing for photos with the very woman they intended to erase. Claire's story became a cautionary tale, one that echoed far beyond her small town. Documentaries, podcasts, and news specials dissected every detail. But for those who knew her, she was more than the headlines. She was a daughter, a teacher, a friend. Her life mattered not because of the way it ended, but because of the light she had carried within it. A light snuffed out too soon by two people who thought their secret would never surface. In the end, justice came, but not without scars. The photographs from that day, Claire in her gown, Matthew holding her hand, guests cheering, now carried a different meaning. They weren't memories of love. They were frozen images of betrayal in progress, snapshots of a murder in disguise. And behind every perfect picture was a truth no one had seen until it was far too late.